Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for another Family Office Insights webinar. We super appreciate you being here with us as usual. Big thank you to the community for participating in these and, of course, your attention. Shout out to Jason Rifkin, who has regularly brought very interesting opportunities to the Family Office Insights investor community. And so we're super grateful for him because he's smart and advising this company, by the way, and smart and a friend and a fan of Family Office Insights. So we super appreciate that. Thank you, Jason. So Surajit, let's start with you and give a little background on you, and then maybe we'll move to Alex and then get into the meat of the matter. Thanks for doing this together today, guys.
Thanks, Arthur, for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Surajit Dhara. I'm the founder and CEO of Episteme Prognostics. I'm a cancer biologist by training, and I have been a cancer biologist from last 25 years or so. I have led multiple projects across various malignancies, but my most significant contribution has been this project in pancreatic cancer, which was initially initiated as an academic research project at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, followed by Dartmouth Cancer Center in New Hampshire. With over 5 years of investigation, we discovered a chromatin accessibility pattern, a specific signature in the pancreatic tumor, which can accurately predict whether or not chemotherapy is going to work on a patient. The discovery was significant and highly valuable. So I wanted to make sure that it reaches to the patient as soon as possible. And that's when Episteme was founded. And Professor Stephen DeLeach, my mentor, a friend, philosopher, and guide, who was a director at the Dartmouth Cancer Center at the time, and Steve and I co-founded this company, Episteme Prognostics. And then I met my other team members, Jason, Robert Warren, Alex Kleban, Greg Ho, and other people. And thus far, we have raised about 6.5 million for Episteme, launched a clinical study with 4 major cancer centers in the country. And we have recently submitted a clear diagnostic certification to the New York State Department of Health for a regulatory clearance of our test. And right now, we are planning to launch the test for commercialize. You will hear the story from Alex in great detail. And so let me hand this over to Alex now. Alex, please.
Yes. Thank you, Surajit. So just trying to get through these. Hopefully
we can see it. That looks
good. Okay, great. Just a little housekeeping.
You're on the 10 to 13 million cancer patients.
Fantastic. So yeah, this is, and I'll just introduce myself very quickly, but I'm Alex Kleban. I'm an advisory role to the company, working on fundraising and supporting the business development efforts for revenue generation with pharmaceutical partners, and we'll get into that in a moment. So the mission of the company is, in any given year, you have about between 10 and 13 million cancer patients receiving chemotherapy, and chemotherapy is failing for 7 to 9 million of those patients, right? So it's a problem that we all know. I think everybody's been touched by this issue in their life. And the mission of the company is to ensure that we have a test and we have a method to make sure that only the patients who could benefit from that chemotherapy would get it. And if people would not benefit from it, they would receive a different treatment that could work for them, right? So at its simplest form, that's the mission. That's what we try to achieve as a company of Episteme. So moving to the next one, how does this work? Now, I appreciate this is a little bit of a complicated slide here, but I'd like you to separate it into the top and the bottom, okay? And the top is what happens today in these cases is a person gets diagnosed with cancer, and they may get some kind of a test in terms of a genetic test for that cancer, but usually they go straight to chemotherapy. Right. And the chemotherapy, especially in pancreatic cancer, has this very high rate of failure. And a lot of times the standards of care, the rules that govern this process are such that a person would have to fail on that chemotherapy before they could get something else. And so that puts you in a position where that person has had all those side effects. They're much sicker than they were. The cancer has probably progressed, and it's a much, much more difficult case to treat. And the survival probabilities really, really drop. And so the technology that's been invented, and we'll get into some of the data that supports this, is to give this test upfront that has this unique signature. Okay, that's a proprietary unique signature. We have patents and intellectual property around it. And what it can do is it can provide a signature of, will this tumor, will this particular cancer respond to the chemotherapy or not? And what we want to be able to do as Episteme is use this as a tool for the doctor to say, okay, well, you are maybe 95% not going to respond to this chemotherapy. So we need to find something else for you, right? Or they could tell the person you're 95% likely to respond. Therefore, we think this is a great avenue for you and you should expect to have a good result, right? So it's about giving a bit more visibility, a bit more predictability to this process, and hopefully over time improving the survival for a lot of people. Now, how that works is Surajit's department. So I'm going to hand these next two slides over to him, and then I'll come back and talk a bit more about the business opportunity that this presents.
Great. Surajit, before you do that, if it's okay, you mentioned in your first comments that you discovered it in pancreatic situation. And forgive my jargon not being proper. Is the application of this best used in pancreatic cancer, or is it equally effective for multiple types of cancer?
Very good question. So because pancreatic cancer probably the most relevant model for chemotherapy, we started with pancreatic cancer, but our test is applicable to a wide range of solid tumors and including liquid biopsies. So
I think maybe everybody's not familiar with liquid biopsies, but the concept of it is so in cancer treatment, what you have to do is you have to establish some data or some proof for every single cancer that you're going to go for, right? And so the idea with pancreatic cancer is it's one of the most severe. Certainly anybody who's known anyone, and I have unfortunately in my life, who's had pancreatic, it's the worst one you can get, right? It's really 13% survival rate. From long-term stuff for pancreatic cancer. So it's terrible. And I think it gives an opportunity for the company to show that really, even in this very severe cancer, that you can have an impact. And if you can have an impact in the worst type of cancer you could get, then think about what would happen in the others, right? And part of the journey of the company, though, and what we have to do is we have to accumulate and present proof in all of those other types of cancers in order to have those opportunities in time, right? That's a little bit of the process of how it works in this business.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks, Alex. So that is why we started with pancreatic cancer. And this study, it was published like a few years ago in Nature Communications. It's a one of a kind study. First time we showed that you can actually differentiate between patients who are likely to benefit from chemotherapy with patients who are not likely to benefit from chemotherapy. So the blue line of patients are likely to benefit for chemotherapy, and other extreme is a red line who are unlikely to benefit from chemotherapy with a very high accuracy. So that was the foundation of our actually company. That's how company was founded. We wanted to take this test forward. And on this basis, Alex, can I have the next slide, please?
Of course.
On that basis, we recently developed a more comprehensive test. We call it Panc Episteme DX Duo. What Duo does is not only it tells who are likely or unlikely to benefit for chemotherapy, but it also tells whether or not what is the best alternate regimen. If no chemo is the decision, what the patient should do next. Do the patient has a mutation matched therapy? If not, third phase is an possible epigenetic investigational therapy they should go for. So in other words, we can cater to 100% patient.
So the whole process that we've all sadly been exposed to of how awful chemotherapy is, quality of life, etc. Why wouldn't, aside from it being properly approved or whatever you need to do to get this done, right? This test in a standard of care context, why wouldn't somebody want to do this? It
So
seems like it's an absolute yes.
That's why we love, the investment story. That's the story, right? In the case and its simplicity is that if you can have this, if a physician and a patient are armed with this information, it opens up a world of possibility for them, right? And it can really improve survival, and it's something that we strongly believe should be standard of care. The challenge is getting it through to that next step, right? That's probably a bit more what we're here to talk about today, but yeah, we absolutely believe that it's something that would qualify for standard of care.
yeah, thank you, Alex. So actually, one-liner adding to your question, Arthur. So chemotherapy, if it works, chemotherapy is first of all is toxic,
Yeah.
and you do not want chemotherapy to fail. Right now, what happens is chemotherapy is given blindly to everyone.
Yeah.
And those patients who do not respond to it, their tumor becomes resistant. Patient becomes like their opportunity for subsequent therapeutic opportunities are significantly reduced, emotional, financial stress, all sorts of stuff. You do not want to give chemotherapy to patients who are not likely to benefit from it. So that is how our test is one of a kind, which tells yes or no to chemotherapy first. And then if no chemotherapy, then based on this test, you can skip the chemotherapy and go for your best alternate option. And that way, payers are okay to pay for it. And doctors
Yeah.
are okay to
Of course, that has to get paid for. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can cover that a bit as we go. So summarizing it all, right? This is that bottom half of the chart we showed before, and really this is the future vision. Is, as we said, a patient would come in, they would get this test, it would give them some prediction ability as to what's the best pathway for them, and then they can go that direction. And the benefits are as we discussed, right? A person would not have to go through 6 months of treatment that maybe would not work. They would not have to suffer some of those side effects. They could go to the next best option more quickly. That would reduce a lot of risks around the treatment, avoiding unnecessary, chemotherapy and the cost. Let's not forget it costs $200,000 is the average cost of the chemotherapy, all in, across paying for the medication, paying for the doctors and the hospital visits and everything. And so with a test that could cost a fraction of that, you could potentially save quite a bit of money as a healthcare system overall and achieve a better outcome. So it's all the things that you like to see from a development in the healthcare sector. Now, so the next slide is really talking about how we turn this into a company and a business. And I should mention, and Arthur had asked us to mention that we're doing 2 buckets of financing here, right? So the company's raised about $6.5 million to date. We're working through a bridge round of $4.5 million. We're more than halfway through that. And we're working then in parallel on a Series A round, which will really support the commercial launch of the company, which will be much bigger. And we'll cover those in more detail at the end. Now, where this is going to fit in the broader landscape of the industry, because there are a number of companies out there working on these types of tests, but not many doing exactly what Episteme's doing. So you have really 3 main types of tests that we see. There's chemotherapy response prediction, which is a new thing. Only 2 companies are working on it. It's us and a company called Tempus, which is a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company. In fact, it's a company that we know, as you can imagine. The Episteme test has outperformed in the data that's been published, the Tempus test, by a factor of more than 2 to 1. So there's a really strong technology foundation here. So that's the only ones in there. So we had this idea of creating this new class. The second class is this therapy selection, what you call. So this is where somebody would have failed maybe already on chemotherapy, and then they're getting a test that's telling them what's genetically making up that tumor and whether other medications would work better, other targeted therapies would work better. So this is an established industry, and all the companies you see on this list have an offering in there. It's about a $9 billion market. It's quite significant. Then there's minimal residual disease, or short for MRD is the short. That's a very big market. And what this is doing is saying, after a person's been through chemotherapy, if thankfully they've been in remission or cured, we have to monitor if the cancer is going to come back. And what these tests do is they take blood samples and they check for any trace of potentially that cancer coming back to try to catch it, in some cases up to a year before it would be noticed on a scan or on some symptoms or other screenings that they would do. So again, it's one of these tests that's buying people a lot of time. And this is already a multi-billion-dollar industry with MRD. Episteme has an ability to play in all three of these opportunities. Right? So that's an important thing to mention.
Is there, not to suggest people would do things that aren't in the best interest of the patient, but is there headwinds for people that don't want you to succeed at this?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the way that we see it is this is, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is expanding the industry, right? And making everything more focused. So, if you think about it from everybody's perspective, all the companies on this list, they have an offering in the other segments, and this is new. This is a completely new idea. It's a new technology, right? And it's new data that's proving this. Why would they not want to go for this new market, right? So I think it's an opportunity to build this as a new category and really benefit a lot of people. If you're the pharmaceutical company, you're saying, well, the standard of care is a 40-year-old chemotherapy drug, and they're not making a lot of money on those drugs, right? I mean, if you're practical about it. So what would happen then is, let's say you're developing some new innovative medicine, and you're saying, well, I can't get that medicine to the market because it's going to go third or fourth in line after all these other medicines, right? Well, what if you could bring that further up? That's an opportunity for you to succeed and to grow as a company.
That totally makes sense. Yeah.
And you're talking about the insurers, and you're saying, well, hey, we're putting 200,000 in chemo down the drain 90% of the time. What if we were to change that process, right? So we think everybody can win in a situation like this with this technology.
Yep. Great. Thanks.
So the next is, and this talks specifically about pancreatic cancer, right? But we see this as a 300 to 400 million opportunity in the U.S. alone. There's 67,000 cases a year, and you have 20 to 30,000 of those who would be survivors, right? Each year, some will survive, and they'll continue for a long time, and that's important for this idea of testing them in the future. And so we have this core test, which is this predictive test to talk about. If we look at a comparable price in the market, and we look at maybe the number of patients who could be eligible for this test, we get to about a $200 million commercial opportunity for that test alone. Then the second test we can offer, which is, let's say that the test is showing you that chemotherapy would not work, and you need to do the second component of the test is saying, well, what would work for you? We think that could be a further $150 million opportunity. We have 135 here in this exact forecast. And so that would form the core of the commercial opportunity for the company. It would be in pancreatic cancer.
Do you think that ratio is about what you expect? That 80% of the people will punt on chemotherapy because it won't work?
Well, it's statistically, these are the statistics of the market, right? Yeah. So if you were to look up, there's a SEER database. It's a cancer database that has all the data on number of cancer cases, survival. If you look at a lot of the patient associations, it's a pretty widely accepted number. Yeah. That's somewhere around 87%, I think, is the exact number that would not reach, a 3-year survival in pancreatic.
Yeah.
So one more liner maybe I can add here, Arthur, is right now the NCCN guideline cleared or mandated pancreatic cancer, NGS testing needs to be done for predicting what kind of therapies they should receive. So here, that means every one of the patients are supposed to get this test done to know whether they are likely going to benefit from the first-line chemotherapy or they are unlikely to benefit from first-line chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the unlikely cases will be more, but virtually each patient should be getting the testing done.
On one hand, it's unfortunately chemotherapy would not be successful for a majority of the people, but on some level, that's a good news because who wants to go through that if it's not going to work, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult.
Doctors need to have a strong evidence justification to skip chemo. That is the main value of chemotherapy prediction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So the next line, this is a bit to your question earlier, Arthur, was around, are there other cancers that this could be used in? And so we've done a bit of work to really map that out and understand what that would mean. And using a similar method in terms of calculating the market, we would get to about a $3.5 billion opportunity for all of these tests together that we can offer. And when you look at the top cancers by counts per year, it's colorectal, bladder cancer, head and neck, pancreatic, liver. Gosh, these are the ones where we think the test could offer a lot of benefit that are also quite significant in terms of the number of people that would have those cancers in any given year. All told, it's about 800,000 to 1 million patients in any given year in the U.S. alone. This is then talking about the broader market. Okay, so this would include all the different areas that this area of the diagnostics sector touches. So we believe this chemotherapy response prediction market is about the $3 billion market potential. There is an active biopharma services market that these companies all participate in. And what this is doing is it's working with pharmaceutical companies on clinical trials to provide these genomic tests during the trials. And so that's an established $3 billion market. A lot of the companies that were on the slides before are very big. They have big market share, big participants in that market. And then there's cancer therapy selection. So this is for 700,000 or so advanced cancer patients in any given year in the US. They're receiving these tests that are genomic tests that are telling you the profile of those tumors and helping to find a targeted therapy. And Episteme can participate in all three of these markets.
Yeah. Clearly, there's room, right?
There's a lot of room for everybody. Yeah, and and it's growing. If you look at the main companies, they're growing somewhere north of 20%. Some are growing as much as 50, 80% in a given year. And it's simply because there's a lot of rapid adoption of these tests. There's also more reimbursement that's coming in. So a lot of the revenue growth you're seeing is that they're testing people and then they're getting increased reimbursement primarily from Medicare. And that's really helping to grow the industry. Now, this is the path to revenue for Episteme. So the idea here is to show you for each of those big segments that we've spoken about, where the progress is for the company as of today, right? And so the chemotherapy response prediction is the main target market. We move through the submission of a CLIA certification. Now, why that's important, because I'm sure we'll get the question is, well, what about the FDA? How does that factor into it? What are the rules around launching a test? And diagnostics is a very interesting area, particularly because it's one of the few where an FDA clearance or an FDA approval is not needed to market the test, generally speaking. And that's a little bit different to what you'll hear from other companies. Pharmaceuticals and biotechs and medtechs, they all need to have 510K approval or an FDA approval. In diagnostics, what the FDA has allowed is this lab developed test or LDT pathway that you can research or maybe you heard about. And that allows you to bring an innovative test to market more quickly and provide more information to the physicians and to the patients so they can make decisions. The hurdle for it is this CLIA certification. And what that means is you need a lab that's certified, it's consistent, it has repeatable processes, and it's well controlled, right? And so that's the main hurdle. And so the company submitted to New York State in order to achieve that certification. And that's where we are in the timeline now. Once that's completed, and we hope it's soon, we'll be able to launch the tests commercially.
So
after that, yes, go ahead.
No, just you say you've submitted, and I know it's a detail, but if you get approved by New York State, do the rest of the states just automatically approve it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Now, New York State is the highest bar in the country, in fact. And so if you can be approved in another state, but New York will not let you offer the test in their state unless you have a New York CLIA. And to my knowledge, they're the only ones to do that. It's a very specific nuance within the industry. So yes, we've gone for the toughest one, and once New York State is done, you can go national.
And do you think that that's imminent? 6 months away, 2 years away, like FDA type stuff was?
We would hope for more like the 6-month range, but this is really hard to predict. And it's one of the things we say to our existing investors too, right? Is that this is a government agency we're dealing with. And so we don't control what they do, right? So to be clear, so we do everything that we can to be responsive, to submit high quality information and just do everything in our control as a company. But of course we have to wait for them to make the final decision. But the timelines we've been given by consultants in the industry, we would really hope for 6 to 12 months as a range. And that would allow us to get to the market and start providing the test to patients and start maybe collecting some revenue at that stage. The other thing we can do once we have that is we can submit for reimbursement from Medicare, CMS, Medicare. And so with the Medicare reimbursement, it's very interesting because really about 3/4 of the patients in pancreatic cancer are over 65, so they would be Medicare beneficiaries. Medicare is actually the main payer, the main funder of genomic testing in America, which is kind of hard to believe, right? But Medicare has really led the charge because it's all about patient benefit and what's best for Medicare beneficiaries. It's a different equation to insurers, right? Insurers have an equation of how do I balance my costs and my P&L and what I tell to Wall Street every quarter, right? CMS doesn't have that burden, so they've really been great about supporting and helping this industry to grow. And they're the first ones to reimburse. And after Medicare reimburses, then you can get the private insurance. But roughly, you would expect that well more than half of those sales of this company in the future potentially would be from Medicare.
Do you go ahead and try to get that approval in advance of the CLIA certification?
It's a good question. The way the regulations work, it's one step after the other. So you need to have a certified test, and then you can obtain codes. And you have to use the codes to then submit for two different things, right? So there's coverage, which is to say that will Medicare accept to cover this test and offer that as a benefit? And once you have coverage, then you can discuss the price.
Got it.
And so there's two really good things we have going for us, right? Which is that there's a lot of these other tests in the market doing different things that already have the coverage and they already have prices, right? And so maybe it offers us some pathway to what they call crosswalk or try to match just some of that coverage that they have. And so it could give us an opportunity maybe to get more quickly to the reimbursement. The other thing is always established prices. Now, prices are very expensive for these tests, right? So the kind of low end of these tests is about $2,000, and there's some that go for as much as $6,000 or more. So it can be quite significant. But the sooner we get this done, the sooner we can work on the reimbursement and go through that timeline.
Nice. Super interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
I know it's a little bit in the weeds, but it was fascinating.
It's a great, but it's important to get into the nuts and bolts, right?
Yeah.
If you're asking for investment, right, you want to make sure everybody understands what the risks are and how you work. The other one I should mention on this page before we move on is biopharma. And so we were really far in discussions with a biopharma company, and there's about 20 companies that have programs where we think they're in clinical trials that they could benefit from this Episteme test. Right? And it's a new class of drugs that used primarily for cancer, where they're these epigenetic drugs. And we think we have a good way to differentiate ourselves and stand out versus the other competitors and offer something truly unique. And so part of the process that we're going through and that I'll be working with over the next year for the company is engaging with those big pharma companies and finding a way to get to projects that can generate revenue for Episteme. And that's a really big hurdle, right? And I think we all know who do early stage companies is getting over that revenue hurdle. It brings a lot of credibility and attracts a lot of additional investment. So it's a really important milestone for the company to achieve that.
And creates better valuation so you can give away less of the company when you do the next raise, right?
That also helps, and it also helps that you bring cash in the company and you have a bit less capital you have to raise too, right? So there's a lot of ways where it helps, and pharmaceutical companies, in my experience in the industry, are great partners. Obviously, they're very well capitalized. They have a lot of cash on the balance sheet. There's a lot of money to be made on these programs, and and they treat their partners in that way, right? So they want a good, reliable partner, and they do reward companies and partners of theirs for that. So it's really attractive as a business line to help the company to grow. It's a very attractive area. Yeah. So I'll keep moving if that's okay. So I'll talk about a little bit the other companies, and I have another chart that maybe I should add to the pack, but these are the main companies in the space, and you can see on the left-hand side the market caps, right? So this is, in fact, now there's been a few IPOs and some other success stories, and this is now a $100 billion sector, right? So this is run a few months ago, so a bit outdated data. If you go back 15 years, this was a $4 billion sector, and the only company in the sector was Illumina. It was 96% of the market cap, and now all of a sudden, all of these other companies have come in over the last 15 years. And these are the main ones. These are the ones that are diagnostic labs, similar to what Episteme will be. In fact, Exact Sciences was just acquired for $21 billion. So we're also starting to see the M&A happen in the sector. And, we talked to some of the companies on this page and some that are not on the page. And, we've had a lot of feedback, and really their feedback is, we need 3 milestones for this company, right, to get to that next step. And it's going to be producing some more data. The company's working on that. So clinical data showing the benefits of the test and showing the performance. We need to get some revenue. So we just talked about that, and probably with these pharmaceutical companies or otherwise. And we need to get the test into the market. So we need to get through that CLIA certification, right? So those are really the 3 things that establish you as a company in genomics and sector. And that's all the 3 things that Episteme is doing. And it's feedback we've had from some of these companies and in the broader capital markets. So we're kind of on the right path. And really it's about moving along and continuing to execute.
88 billion. Wild.
Yeah, it's a big business. Now the multiples are very high.
Yeah.
As you'll see, these are revenue multiples, right? So
Yeah.
these are, not what you would typically see in public markets, but it's one of these spaces that is growing much more quickly than others, right? So if you look at a lot of the healthcare world, you'll have medical device companies, growing around about 5% a year. Great growth, very consistent, very steady. You'll have some pharmaceutical companies that they're so huge that to grow 3 or 4%, given the amount of sales they have, is a really significant achievement. And these are smaller companies, and they're growing from small revenue baselines, but they're really growing rapidly. And the reason being is if you have 700,000 cancer patients 10 years ago, nobody was getting a test, right? So every year it's tens of thousands of more people getting these tests. And then you're having this concept of repeat testing. Even after a person's been hopefully treated and cured for cancer, you have to repeat test them for many years after. So the volumes of testing is increasing. And so far, Medicare and the private insurers have understood the benefit, right, of detecting cancer earlier or doing a better job, being more focused with how you treat people with cancer. And they're seeing the benefits of that as well. And they've been more than willing to pay for it and sponsor in a way the growth of the industry. And, the capital markets have also taken notice over time. You see that in the market caps. We've also had 4 now, I think it's 4 IPOs as of this week of companies in the sector just in the past year. So it's the capital market activity is picking back up in diagnostics.
You may have mentioned it, but is the occurrence of cancer or diagnosis of cancer on the upswing, leveling out?
Well, it's a good question, right? So usually by the end, when somebody becomes symptomatic, they have cancer. Right. Yeah. So at some level you get to close to 100% because certainly by the end. But the question of detecting cancer earlier is really critical, right? And so yes, over time, things like colonoscopies, colon cancer is one of the top 3 cancer killers.
Saw
right?
That, yeah.
So the fact that people are doing colonoscopies now much earlier is detecting a lot more cases at an earlier stage, which is meaning people are getting treated and cured, right? You go from, I know colon cancer unfortunately very well, but you go from about an 85% chance of survival at stage 1 down to about 10 to 15% by stage 4, right? So the early detections is massive, massive impact. The same goes for lung cancer, right? So people that have been smokers or have other high risk factors, they should be getting these low-dose CT scans for lung cancer, and so there's more screening happening there. And there's also more blood tests and early detection tests for a range of different cancers, right? So one of the things a lot of these companies are doing is they're working on what they call multi-cancer early detection tests, right? And that's to give a blood test for somebody at an early stage and catch them before they even know they have anything. So yeah, there's a lot of innovation happening, and really, I think the direction of travel, if you will, is for cancer to become a chronic disease, kind of like arthritis or something else, where a person's diagnosed and they're treated, but over a number of years. And they have very good survival, right? And I think a lot of us, certainly in my situation and seeing relatives and things like that, we probably have in mind that cancer is kind of a death sentence. But really that's changing rapidly. And then hopefully in 10 or 20 more years with a lot of this technology that's coming out, including from Episteme, that'll be much more of a treatable and early detected and, better treated condition.
Yep. Super interesting.
Yeah, we agree. We certainly love the sector, and it has a lot of benefits for a lot of people. Yeah. I don't know if I want to move on, or do you want to keep? We could do questions, or maybe just kind of wrap up.
I've been asking them as they've been coming up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, this is where we are, broadly speaking, on the capital raise side. And so my role is really working on Series A, and Jason and Serge have been really working on this safe round, bridge round. We've had a 4.1 million seed, some grant money, Spring Mountain Capital, Waymark Capital, and a number of individual healthcare investors who are seasoned. I would say they've invested in biotech in the past and in other areas of healthcare were part of the seed round. They've also funded much of the bridge round. So we've increased this, in fact, since these slides to now 4.5. We've actually exceeded the 2.5 in terms of capital in on the save. And now we're working on this bigger capital raise, the Series A round. And the idea of the Series A round is the SAFE will get us through to be able to commercialize the test. But when we commercialize, as you'll know, you need a lot of things. You need sales reps, you need a much bigger marketing presence, you need a much bigger laboratory that can handle the business coming in. So we have to invest in all of those things. And we believe that this 15 million, based on the forecast we put together, will get us to a point where we have a magic number in mind, which is 3,500 tests. And we think that at 3,500 tests, with the pricing that we believe we can get, the test would break even. Cash flow would be break even or positive. And we just think that's a really important metric to keep in mind, is that, with this amount of capital, it could get to be a cash flow positive proposition for a strategic partner, an acquirer, or to justify a next round of investment to continue growing the company. So that's really a lot of focus on ensuring that economically this is a very viable opportunity.
Is there a natural exit here?
Well, I mean, yeah, the ideal scenario would be if you have 5 or 6 really big companies in this sector with really big sales forces, talking to lots of cancer doctors, providing lots of tests, having diagnostic labs. It's not far to think about having one of those as a long-term home for a company like Episteme, right? Yeah. So I think, certainly there's a lot of options, a lot of ways that this could go, but clearly working with a big partner like one of those would be ideal.
And the moat is the patent around what you found in the pancreas, right?
That's right. So there's really the couple things, right? So there's know-how and there's really IP, but this process of how you do this is really unique and really proprietary. And then when it comes down to it, what you have is literally a signature, right? It's a genetic, epigenetic, in this case, signature. Very complicated, very detailed, very hard to understand and replicate. And that's what's at the core of the IP for all of these companies, right? Is that they develop these processes and these algorithms and these signatures for all these different cancers. And then they protect that pretty fiercely from an IP perspective. Yeah. So yeah, the company's filed IP, and Surajit can talk more on the IP strategy of the company.
Yeah, it's a process patent, I guess.
Yes, method and process patent.
Yeah.
And also the signature is protected as well.
Yeah. That's a good moat. I mean, it's not my area, but it sounds like a good moat to me, right?
Yep. Yep.
The best you can get in this sector.
Yeah. So what do you think is the magic? Is the 3,500 or the 3-some-odd thousand tests, the math just working out to be a push, meaning that you've got revenue and it's on the verge of being cash flow positive? Is that the magic number?
I believe so. I think that having worked, with some of the companies in the sector in the past, it's difficult now to convince a company or an investor to take on perpetual cash burn, right? And the world's just changed. 10 years ago, I think, I've been in the markets a long time, and I think that was more viable, and it's just not anymore. So, being able to go in and say to people that we're close to this break even, or this test is generating cash flow, and that would justify maybe some further investment. That to me is probably, like say, kind of a magic or really important, certainly critical hurdle to overcome. I think if you're asking people that, hey, we're at 3,500 tests, and in 10 more years when we get to 35,000 we can break even. Yeah, that's a different story to be telling people. So certainly you want to be focused on making money, and I think we can. In any situation like this, you could spend billions on R&D, right? But really, this is about distilling it to a product and making that product successful, and having that as a vehicle to really build more of a company around it, or find a partnership that that works with investors and is an attractive return on the capital.
Totally makes sense. we don't have to pick on any single one of these investors, but is this a big check for Spring Mountain, Waymark, or Great Oaks? Or is it just a small check compared to their pocketbook?
Compared to their AUM, this is a relatively small allocation. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's an early stage. It's not classically what any of these particular firms invested in core positions. At SMC, String Mountain's much more of a private equity kind of growth capital company, but they've come in, and a lot of the others that we've spoken to through the Series A process have been venture capital mostly, and also strategic companies that have their own investment funds, right? Either they have their own standalone VC fund or they invest capital as part of their core business. So we've had a lot of feedback. To get to 15 million, we're going to need an outside investor with expertise in healthcare. And that's probably going to have to be, either one of the companies that's big in the sector or an established healthcare venture capital firm.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. What do you think if just back on the approval, once you get approved for CLIA and then Medicare, is the VA automatic? And is that an important market?
VA is not one of the bigger markets. The way that it's such a good question, right? So the way that you find patients and volumes in this market, right, is usually, especially with pancreatic cancer, people get referred through a bigger cancer center. So in the New York area, it's NYU and it's Sloan Kettering, right? And Tampa Bay, it's Moffitt and so on. Down here, I'm in Texas, but it's UT Southwestern and MD Anderson and such. So they tend to be magnets for these cases, right? And so each of those hospitals can see up to 1,000 pancreatic cancer patients a year, and of the 67,000 in the country, right? So if you look at it, a lot of the market very, very highly concentrated in those. So VA, yes, but it's a relatively smaller proportion of the total.
Got it. Yeah, so it's not target-rich environment from that perspective at all. It's
No,
really
I mean, you want to try to
interesting.
reach the most people you can
Right.
with the resources you have. In companies like this, there's not a lot of resources, so you go where you can get the most impact.
So it's not so relevant to the discussion here, but I'm curious. Fortunately, I haven't had to do this, but when you are in a rural area, do you automatically seek out a metropolitan area that has a cancer hospital? You're not going to go to the local hospital for this, right?
Oh yeah, you need to find an oncologist, a clinical oncologist, right?
Yeah.
So there are referral networks that help that process to happen. But yeah, it's not uncommon for people from all over the country, all over the world, actually, to go to MD Anderson or Sloan Kettering or Sinai, one of the big centers in the U.S. It's pretty common. It's not a thing that I think if you're a primary care physician in Kentucky or something and you see a pancreatic cancer case, you're not trying to treat that on your own.
No,
Right?
probably not a good idea.
Call someone at a bigger center up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been super interesting. I really appreciate it. And there's clarity around what you're doing now. And I think the community will appreciate it. Surajit, do you have anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap it up?
No, it's all covered. If you have any specific question for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, we have a bunch of folks that we're going to share this with, and so stay tuned, and we'll put them in touch. And for everybody on the call, if there's anybody that that might find this interesting from an investment perspective, feel free to reach out, and we'll make sure we put you in touch. And don't feel like you need to. You can actually reach out directly to Jason or Alex as well. You don't need to put us in the way, but we're happy to facilitate it. So with that, thanks, guys. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll make sure that everybody gets in touch.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you again, Jason. Okay. Till next time. Bye-bye.